When Bewitched first appeared on television screens on September 17, 1964, no one could have imagined the powerful spell it would cast on audiences for decades to come. It wasn't just another sitcom, it was a show that brought magic, humor, and heart into the living rooms of millions. The story of a witch trying to live a normal suburban life captured the imagination of viewers of all ages. At its center was Samantha Stephens, a graceful and kind-hearted witch portrayed by the wonderful Elizabeth Montgomery. Samantha's life took a surprising turn when she fell in love with an ordinary mortal man, Darren Stephens, played by Dick York. Despite being from two completely different worlds, Samantha and Darren's marriage represented hope, the idea that love could overcome any difference, even one between magic and reality. The result was a funny, charming, and deeply human show that quickly became one of television's most beloved series. The creator of the show, Soul Sax, was inspired by two earlier films, I Married a Witch from 1942 and Bell, Book and Candle from 1958. Both of these movies told stories about witches trying to live among humans, but Soul Sax wanted to take the concept in a lighter, more humorous direction. He thought, what if a witch just wanted to live like everyone else? From that question, Bewitched was born. The idea was simple yet brilliant, a magical woman trying to fit into an ordinary world, constantly facing funny and unpredictable problems caused by her own powers. It was a story that blended everyday family life with elements of fantasy in a way that no one had seen before. And thanks to the clever writing and heartfelt performances, it worked perfectly. From its very first season, Bewitched became a sensation. Audiences loved the gentle humor, the clever dialogue, and the chemistry between the characters. Elizabeth Montgomery's Samantha was elegant, kind, and mischievous, a woman who wanted nothing more than a normal life with her husband, even if her magical family made that impossible. Her mother Endora, played by the brilliant Agnes Moorehead, constantly interfered with Samantha's marriage, using her powers to test Darren's patience and create chaos in their peaceful suburban home. Endora's love for her daughter was clear, but she couldn't understand why a powerful witch would choose to live as a mortal housewife. This ongoing battle between mother and husband became one of the show's most loved running themes, filled with humor, sarcasm, and magical mischief. The show's success also came from its clever ability to comment on real social issues through fantasy. In the 1960s, America was going through massive changes. Discussions about gender equality, traditional roles, and women's independence were becoming more common. Bewitched managed to explore these topics in a gentle, entertaining way. Samantha, who had the power to make anything happen with a twitch of her nose, represented the modern woman who was capable, intelligent, and independent. Yet she chose to hide her powers for the sake of her marriage, showing both love and restraint. Viewers could see themselves in her struggle, balancing personal identity with societal expectations. This subtle message helped the show connect deeply with audiences, especially women who saw Samantha as a symbol of quiet strength and empowerment. But Bewitched was not just about magic and messages. It was also a product of great teamwork and brilliant production. The show's creators and crew were masters at using early television technology to create believable magic on screen. Before computer graphics existed, they used creative camera tricks, hidden wires, and clever editing to make objects move. Doors open by themselves, and Samantha vanish or appear in a puff of smoke. For the 1960s, these effects were groundbreaking, and they gave Bewitched its unique visual charm. Kids were fascinated by the tricks, and adults loved the witty humor behind each spell gone wrong. Elizabeth Montgomery's performance was the heart of it all. She brought warmth, humor, and grace to Samantha, making her one of the most beloved TV characters of all time. Her ability to combine light comedy with genuine emotion gave Bewitched its soul. When Samantha looked at Darren with love or frustration, it felt real. Her chemistry with Dick York, who played her husband, made their relationship believable and endearing. Their marriage felt like a partnership to people trying to make it work, despite their very unusual differences. Dick York's Darren Stephens was also an unforgettable part of the show. He played the role of the ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances with perfect timing and expression. His reactions to Samantha's magical mishaps, whether it was a floating broom or a disappearing boss, were always spot on. York's comedic style was natural and full of heart. Behind the scenes, though, his life was not as lighthearted as it appeared on screen. Years earlier, while filming the movie, They Came to Cordera in 1959, he suffered a terrible back injury. The injury caused him severe pain for the rest of his life. Even though he was often in agony, he continued to perform on Bewitched with dedication and professionalism as the seasons went by. York's health began to decline. There were days when he could barely stand, but he still showed up to deliver his lines. His commitment to the show was remarkable, but it came at a heavy cost. During the filming of the 5th season, his body finally gave out. One day, he suffered a seizure on set and was rushed to the hospital. It was clear he couldn't continue. His departure broke the hearts of his co-stars, especially Elizabeth Montgomery, who had grown close to him as a friend and acting partner. York's exit marked the end of an era for Bewitched, and even though the show continued, many fans felt that something special had been lost. When Dick Sargent stepped in to replace York as Darren, audiences were initially resistant. It was always difficult for viewers to accept a new actor in a familiar role. However, Sargent brought a calmer, more relaxed energy to the character. Over time, fans accepted him, and the show carried on successfully for several more years. Still, there was a subtle change in tone. The chemistry between Samantha and Darren felt different. And while the humor remained, the emotional connection wasn't quite the same. It wasn't Sargent's fault, it was simply the natural result of such a major change in dynamic. Even with all these challenges, Bewitched continued to thrive. It remained one of the highest-rated shows on television and received multiple Emmy nominations. The magical mix of family values, fantasy, and comedy kept people tuning in week after week. Kids would gather around the TV to see what new spell Samantha might cast. While adults enjoyed the clever writing and relatable humor, the show seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show, both in the relationships among the cast and in the creative direction of the series. As Bewitched moved into its later seasons, the magic began to fade, not on screen, but behind it. The show had been running successfully for many years, but the long hours, creative disagreements, and personal struggles were taking a toll on everyone involved. Elizabeth Montgomery, who had carried the show with grace and energy, was beginning to feel the weight of repetition. The same storylines were being reused in slightly different ways. A spell gone wrong, a misunderstanding, a quick fix, and a happy ending. What once felt fresh and exciting was starting to feel predictable. Audiences, too, were beginning to notice. Television was changing, and new shows with more modern ideas were taking the spotlight. One of the biggest challenges came from the constant changes in the cast and writing team. The loss of Dick York had already been a huge emotional and creative blow. And though Dick Sargent did his best, the show's chemistry shifted permanently. Viewers missed the warmth between Samantha and the original Darren. At the same time, tensions behind the camera were rising. Elizabeth Montgomery's marriage to the show's producer, William Asher, was falling apart. What had once been a strong creative partnership had turned into a strained relationship filled with disagreements about the show's future. The writing team also struggled to keep the magic alive, literally. After so many seasons, it was difficult to come up with new magical mishaps that felt funny and original. In an attempt to save time and money, the producers began to recycle entire scenes and even full storylines from earlier episodes. This decision would eventually lead to what fans now call the infamous scene. During the show's final season, an episode titled Adam, Warlock or Washout aired. On the surface, it was a typical Bewitched episode. Samantha and Darren's young son, Adam, was being tested to see if he had inherited his mother's magical powers. But sharp-eyed fans quickly noticed something strange. Many of the scenes looked too familiar, not just similar, but identical to footage from an earlier episode called Samantha's Secret is Discovered. Viewers saw the same camera angles, the same reactions, even the same dialogue. It was clear that the show's production team had reused old footage to fill in gaps. For fans who had been watching from the beginning, this felt like an insult. Bewitched had always been about creativity and wonder, and now it seemed lazy and uninspired. The infamous scene became a symbol of how far the show had fallen from its former glory. Instead of ending with a new, memorable story, the final season was filled with repeated plots and recycled moments. Even Elizabeth Montgomery was reportedly upset by this decision. She felt the show deserved better than to end with reused material. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. Montgomery's frustration with the repetitive writing and declining quality grew stronger each week. Her marriage to William Asher was nearing its end, and she no longer felt the same connection to the show that had once brought her joy. The tension on set was thick, and it became clear that the end was near. When Bewitched aired its final episode in March 1972, there was no big farewell, no grand finale, no tearful goodbye. The episode, titled The Truth, Nothing But the Truth, So Help Me, Sam, aired quietly, almost as if the network didn't realize they were closing the book on one of television's most iconic shows. There were no special messages to fans, no emotional wrap-up for Samantha and Darren. The series simply ended. For many viewers, it was a disappointing finish to what had been a magical journey. Yet, in some ways, the quiet ending reflected the exhaustion of everyone involved. After 8 seasons and 254 episodes, Bewitched had done what few shows of its time could. It stayed popular, profitable, and culturally relevant for almost a decade. But all good things must eventually come to an end. The infamous reused footage scene became the final straw for both fans and the cast. It wasn't just about a few repeated shots. It represented the loss of creativity and the weariness that had settled over the production. Elizabeth Montgomery later admitted that by the final season, she was ready to move on. She had given everything she could to Samantha Stephens and wanted to explore new roles and experiences. Even though the final seasons of Bewitched were not as strong as the early ones, the show's legacy remained untouchable. It had introduced television audiences to a world where magic could live alongside everyday life, where laughter and love were stronger than any spell. It broke new ground for female characters on TV, showing that women could be funny, independent, and powerful even if they had to hide it behind a twitch of their nose. After the show ended, reruns kept it alive for new generations. Young viewers who hadn't even been born during its original run fell in love with Samantha and her world of charm and chaos. The magic of Bewitched refused to disappear. Even though Bewitched ended quietly in 1972, its legacy continued to shine brightly for years to come. The show's mix of fantasy, humor, and heart made it timeless. Reruns aired around the world, introducing new audiences to Samantha, Darren, and the unforgettable indoor. Children were fascinated by Samantha's magical nose twitch, while adults found themselves smiling at the show's clever humor and the way it mirrored real-life relationships. Bewitched had managed to capture something truly special, the idea that ordinary life could still feel magical. Even without spells or potions. Elizabeth Montgomery went on to have a successful career after Bewitched, but she was always proud of what the show had accomplished. She knew that Samantha Stephens had become more than just a TV character. She was a symbol of kindness, love, and strength. Fans adored her because she wasn't a perfect witch or a flawless wife. She was human, with real emotions, struggles, and dreams. Through her, Montgomery reminded viewers that true magic comes not from powers, but from the heart. Dick York, whose health had forced him to leave the show, spent his later years focusing on helping others despite his chronic pain. He devoted his time to charity work and stayed in touch with fans who still remembered his warm smile and gentle humor. Dick Sargent also remained proud of his role as Darren, even though he joined the show during a difficult time. Both actors contributed to the magic of Bewitched in their own ways, and both were loved for their efforts. Agnes Moorehead, who played Endora, continued to be one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. Her role as Samantha's fiery and sarcastic mother remains one of television's greatest performances. She brought sophistication and wit to the role, creating a character who was both funny and formidable. Endora's relationship with Darren, filled with teasing, spells, and love-hate banter, remains one of the most iconic parts of the show. Over time, people began to look back on Bewitched with renewed appreciation. It wasn't just a silly show about magic, it was a reflection of its time. It showed how families dealt with differences, how women struggled for identity, and how love could bridge impossible gaps. It also opened the door for future fantasy sitcoms like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I Dream of Jeannie, and even modern hits like WandaVision, which paid tribute to Bewitched style and storytelling. The infamous scene that once symbolized the show's creative decline has now become a piece of its history. Reminder of how television was made in a different era, when time and budget pressures could lead to strange decisions. But for most fans, that scene doesn't define Bewitched. Instead, they remember the laughter, the warmth, and the wonder that filled each episode. Today, Bewitched still airs on streaming platforms and classic TV channels. Its message that love, understanding, and patience can conquer even the biggest challenges continues to resonate. Viewers old and new still smile when Samantha twitches her nose, turning problems into lessons and chaos into laughter. In the end, the story of Bewitched is more than the tale of a witch who tried to live as a mortal. It's about the people behind the magic, the actors who gave their all, the writers who brought the humor to life, and the audiences who kept believing in the impossible. It reminds us that even when the curtain falls, the impact of a great story never truly disappears. Bewitched may have ended with an infamous scene, but its legacy endures as a shining example of classic television at its best, full of heart, humor, and a touch of magic that still enchants the world to this day. There are certain television moments that define an entire era, and for Bewitched, that moment was a single episode that changed everything. Before that scene ever aired, Bewitched had already cast a spell on millions of viewers. The show first appeared on television in 1964 and instantly became one of the most loved sitcoms of its time. People were drawn to its charm, its humor, and the warmth between the two lead characters, Samantha and her husband, Darren Stephens. Samantha, played by Elizabeth Montgomery, was a beautiful, kind, and witty witch who wanted nothing more than to live a normal suburban life with her mortal husband. And Darren, played by Dick York, was the perfect partner, loving, honest, but often overwhelmed by his wife's magical powers and her eccentric witchy family. Together, they created a show that balanced fantasy and reality in a way television had never seen before. At first, Bewitched was magical in every sense of the word. The show's concept felt fresh, the acting was strong, and the chemistry between Montgomery and York gave it emotional depth. Viewers loved seeing how Samantha tried to hide her powers from their nosy neighbors, while using her magic to fix everyday problems. The humor wasn't just about spells gone wrong, it was about the struggle between love, honesty, and identity. Samantha's desire to fit into a normal world was something many viewers related to in their own way. Laughter with a touch of longing, but as the seasons went by, cracks began to appear behind the scenes. Cracks that would eventually lead to one of the most shocking moments in classic TV history. The trouble began with Dick York. The original Darren, York was known for his gentle energy and emotional warmth, which made his version of Darren both funny and lovable. Unfortunately, what viewers didn't see was the pain York was hiding. Years earlier, he had suffered a severe back injury while filming another project. The pain became chronic, and during Bewitched it grew worse every season. York was often in so much pain that he struggled to stand for long periods during filming. Still, he pushed through, wanting to give his best to the show and to his fans. But by the time the 5th season arrived, the pain became unbearable. In one emotional day on set, York collapsed and had to be taken to the hospital. It was clear to everyone he couldn't continue. The producers had to make a choice. They could end the show or replace him. In the end, they chose to keep Bewitched alive by hiring another actor to take over the role of Darren. And that's when Dick Sargent entered the picture. On paper, Sargent was a fine choice, a talented actor with good looks and charm. But what no one could replace was the emotional bond that fans had built with York's version of Darren. Viewers had spent years watching him struggle, laugh, and love alongside Samantha. They had grown attached not just to the character, but to York's unique way of portraying him. When Dick Sargent stepped into the role, it was like a quiet earthquake hit the show. His portrayal was different. Not bad, just different. Sargent's Darren was calmer, less fiery, and more laid back than York's. Where York's Darren would react with wild frustration or heartfelt sincerity, Sargent's reactions felt more restrained. That change may seem small, but it completely altered the chemistry between the two main characters. The banter, the tension, the emotional ups and downs that made Samantha and Darren so believable began to fade. Many fans couldn't connect with this new version, and some even stopped watching altogether by the time Sargent joined the cast. Bewitched had already been on the air for 5 seasons. The novelty that once made it magical had started to wear off. Audiences noticed that the episodes were becoming repetitive. The same pattern kept returning. Samantha uses magic to fix a problem. Darren gets angry or panics. The spell causes chaos, and by the end, things return to normal. At first, that structure was comforting and funny, but after more than 100 episodes, it started to feel predictable. Meanwhile, the world outside the show was changing fast. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a time of enormous social and cultural transformation. The Vietnam War, civil rights movements, feminism, and generational shifts were reshaping America. Television was starting to reflect those changes. New shows were exploring serious topics, politics, race, and real-life struggles. Bewitched, with its lighthearted escapism, started to feel a little out of touch. It still had its loyal fans, but newer audiences were drawn to more modern and realistic storytelling. As a result, the show's ratings began to slip. Even if it remained a classic in spirit, behind the scenes, more problems appeared. The writers and producers who had created the show's early success began leaving to work on other projects. The scripts became uneven. Some episodes sparkled with creativity, while others felt tired. Even Elizabeth Montgomery herself began to lose interest. She had played Samantha for years and felt ready to move on. The spark that had made the show shine seemed to be fading, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. But despite all these challenges, the cast and crew kept going. They tried to recapture the magic, hoping the audience would feel it again. Still, nothing could change the fact that the world had moved on, and Bewitched was struggling to keep up. Yet even as it declined, the show's charm never fully disappeared. It remained one of the most recognizable and beloved sitcoms of its generation. And then came the episode that would change everything. The one that finally brought the truth to light and, in a sense, ended the show for good. The episode that would later be remembered as the moment Bewitched came to an end was titled The Truth. Nothing but the truth. So help me, Sam. It was the final episode of the series. Airing on March 25, 1972, the story started innocently enough. With a little magical prank from Samantha's mischievous mother, Endora, as always, couldn't resist stirring trouble. She cast a spell on a small pin, enchanting it so that whoever wore it would be forced to tell the absolute truth. Endora gave the pin to Samantha, pretending it was a simple gift. Of course, Samantha had no idea what her mother had done, and that's where the chaos began. At first, the spell created a few funny and harmless moments. Samantha, wearing the enchanted pin, started blurting out her honest thoughts to everyone she met. People were shocked and amused by her sudden openness, but as the day went on, her truth-telling began to cause real problems. She revealed secrets, confessed opinions she would normally keep quiet, and confused everyone around her, including Darren. Darren, played now by Dick Sargent, quickly realized something was wrong. He had seen enough of Endora's tricks to know that when strange things started happening, she was usually behind it. He confronted Samantha, and she reluctantly admitted that her mother might have had something to do with her strange behavior. What began as another magical misunderstanding soon turned into something far more serious. Their nosy neighbor, Gladys Kravitz, came by as she often did, suspicious about the odd things she always noticed happening in the Stephens household. Throughout the series, Gladys had been the comic relief, the only one who seemed to notice the supernatural chaos happening next door, even though no one ever believed her. But in this final episode, that long-running joke suddenly became deadly serious. When Gladys visited Samantha, she found her acting strangely. And then, in one unguarded moment, Samantha, still under the influence of the truth spell, told her the one thing she had kept secret for years, that she was a witch. The room went silent. For 8 seasons, the tension of the show had always revolved around this secret. Samantha's true identity and her desperate attempts to live a normal life, that was the very heart of Bewitched. And now, with just a few words, that secret was gone. Gladys was in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but Samantha couldn't stop talking. The pin's magic compelled her to keep telling the truth, so she revealed even more about the spells she had cast, the problems she had caused, and the ways she had used magic to hide her identity. Darren walked in, realizing that everything they had worked to keep hidden was about to be exposed to the entire neighborhood. What followed was both funny and heartbreaking. Darren and Samantha scrambled to calm Gladys down, trying to convince her that she must never tell anyone what she had heard. The tension between them felt different this time. It wasn't just another episode about magic gone wrong. It felt like an ending, like the walls of their carefully built secret world were finally collapsing. And Dora, watching from afar, realized that her little joke had gone too far. She lifted the spell, freeing Samantha from the pin's power, but the damage was done. Gladys now knew the truth, and no spell could erase what she had heard. For longtime fans, this episode carried a deep sense of finality. It was as if the show was acknowledging that it couldn't keep the secret any longer, that Samantha's double life, which had fueled years of stories, had reached its natural end. Symbolically, it felt like the curtain had been pulled back, revealing what everyone already suspected, that even the most charming illusions can't last forever. The truth had finally come out, and with it, the magic that once defined Bewitched began to fade away. While the show never aired another new episode after that, the ending left fans reflecting on how much Bewitched had meant to them. For 8 years, it had brought laughter, comfort, and a touch of wonder into people's homes. It reminded audiences that love could exist between two completely different worlds, a witch and a mortal, if they tried hard enough. But it also showed that every story, no matter how magical, eventually reaches its end. The infamous truth-telling scene wasn't just the end of a sitcom episode. It was a moment that represented the truth behind television itself, that even beloved shows have to let go when their magic runs out. Looking back today, the final episode of Bewitched stands as both a piece of television history and a quiet farewell to a golden era of entertainment. The show's decline wasn't just about one scene or one actor change. It was the result of many small things that built up over time. The shift from Dick York to Dick Sargent changed the heart of the series. The repetitive storylines, the departure of key writers, and the cultural shifts of the 1970s all played a part. Even Elizabeth Montgomery's growing fatigue showed that the show had simply run its course. Yet despite all that, Bewitched never truly lost its charm. For millions of fans, Bewitched was more than a TV show. It was part of their lives. They grew up with Samantha's magical twitch of her nose, and Dora's sarcastic wit, and Darren's endless struggle to balance love and logic. It was a world where fantasy met family life, where every problem could be solved with a spell, and where laughter was the cure for every bit of chaos. That kind of innocent magic is hard to find today. Even when television became more realistic, audiences kept coming back to reruns of Bewitched, craving the warmth and simplicity it represented. The infamous scene from the final episode marked the end of an era, but it also gave the show a powerful kind of closure. It reminded everyone that secrets, even magical ones, can't last forever. It showed that every story eventually needs truth to set it free. While Samantha's confession to Gladys might have been written as just another funny moment, it ended up symbolizing something much bigger. It was the show finally admitting what it had been avoiding, that the spell was over. The laughter, the mystery, the illusion, all of it had reached its natural end. Even though Bewitched went off the air in 1972, its influence never faded. It paved the way for countless other fantasy comedies, from I Dream of Jeannie to modern shows that blend magic and reality. It also changed how audiences saw television, proving that even a story about witches could be heartfelt, human, and deeply relatable. Decades later, the show still airs in reruns and continues to find new fans who weren't even born when it first premiered. That's the true power of Bewitched. It wasn't just about magic. It was magic. When people talk about the infamous scene that took Bewitched off air, they're really talking about more than just an episode. They're talking about a moment when television changed, when an old story made room for new ones. The truth-telling pin, the shocking confession, the quiet goodbye, all of it came together as the perfect way to end a show that had once enchanted the world. In the end, Bewitched remains a reminder that no magic lasts forever, but the memories it leaves behind do. Samantha's final confession may have ended the illusion, but it also sealed the show's place in history as one of television's most unforgettable classics. And even though the credits rolled for the last time more than 50 years ago, the world still remembers the sparkle, the laughter, and the spell that only Bewitched could cast. It's strange how a moment that seems so small on screen can become one of the most talked about endings in television history. Bewitched wasn't just another show. It was a magical part of millions of people's childhoods. A series that brought laughter, charm, and a little sparkle of wonder into homes all over the world. But when it came to an end, it didn't go out with a big farewell or a dramatic goodbye. Instead, It ended with a quiet, almost mysterious moment that left viewers wondering what really happened. Many fans have come to call it the infamous scene, the one that took Bewitched off the air and left behind more questions than answers. To understand why that moment became so famous, we need to go back to the heart of the story. Bewitched followed the life of Samantha Stephens, a beautiful witch who falls in love with a mortal man named Darren. Determined to live a normal life, Samantha promises to give up magic and settle down in the suburbs. But of course, old habits and old spells die hard. Every episode mixed the ordinary with the extraordinary. A broomstick here, a spell gone wrong there, and suddenly dinner with the boss turned into a magical disaster. But underneath all the comedy and fun, Bewitched had something deeper to say. It was about love, compromise, and the struggle to fit in when you're different from everyone else. By the time the final season aired, Bewitched had already become a television legend. But behind the scenes, things weren't as magical as they seemed. Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha, was growing tired of the role. The show had run for 8 long seasons, and its creative spark was beginning to fade. The writers were repeating old storylines, and even the audience could sense the show had lost some of its early magic. Yet, no one expected the ending to come so suddenly, or for it to be wrapped in such quiet mystery. The final episode, titled The Truth, Nothing But the Truth, So Help Me Sam, aired in 1972. On the surface, it looked like a regular episode. A little humor, a little mischief, and Samantha once again trying to keep her magic a secret. But as the story unfolded, something felt different. Gladys Kravitz, the curious and nosy neighbor who had spent years spying on Samantha, finally discovered the truth. After all her wild claims, suspicions, and frantic moments of panic, Gladys saw Samantha's magic with her own eyes. For fans, this was a huge moment, the thing everyone had been waiting for 8 years. Gladys Kravitz had represented the skeptical side of society, the person who always sensed that something unusual was happening but could never quite prove it. She was the human face of disbelief, always dismissed as crazy by her husband and the rest of the neighborhood. So when she finally uncovered the truth, it felt like everything had come full circle. This was the moment when the curtain was lifted. Viewers expected chaos, exposure, and perhaps the end of Samantha's peaceful suburban life. But instead, something surprising happened. In a rare act of compassion, Gladys chose to keep Samantha's secret. She realized that exposing her would cause harm not only to Samantha and her family, but also to herself. No one would believe her, and even if they did, what good would it do? It was a moment of understanding, quiet, human, and strangely beautiful. After years of comic spying and overreactions, Gladys showed a side of herself that was almost heroic. She became the guardian of the very secret she had tried to uncover for so long. The episode ended without any fireworks or emotional speeches. There was no big goodbye, no tearful farewell, no closing montage of memories. The Stephens family simply went on with their lives. The crisis was over. The secret was safe, at least for now. The music played, the credits rolled, and that was it. Bewitched was gone. Just like that. To many fans, it felt unfinished, as if someone had stopped the story mid. But in its quiet way, that final scene said everything it needed to. It reminded viewers that the magic of Bewitched was never really about spells or broomsticks. It was about people, about love, acceptance, and the delicate balance between who we are and who we pretend to be. Samantha's story wasn't about a witch hiding her powers. It was about a woman trying to fit into a world that didn't understand her. And Gladys Kravitz's decision to protect that secret symbolized something much bigger. It showed that even the most ordinary person could choose kindness over curiosity, empathy over judgment. While some fans were disappointed that the show didn't get a dramatic ending, others found meaning in its quiet simplicity. It was true to the show's spirit, funny, warm, and human. But behind the scenes, there were practical reasons for that simple ending. The producers hadn't planned for Bewitched to end when it did. The show's ratings had been declining, and the network decided to cancel it before another season could be made. As a result, there was no time to craft a proper farewell. What fans saw as a mysterious or symbolic ending was, in reality, the result of sudden network decisions and creative fatigue. That unplanned ending gave Bewitched an air of mystery that has lasted for decades. Fans continued to debate whether the final episode was meant to hint at a larger message, or if it was just a coincidence that the last scene carried such emotional weight. Either way, it became one of the most memorable endings in classic television history. The series closed on a note of hope, leaving the Stephens family's future to the imagination. And maybe that's what made it so special. It allowed viewers to believe that somewhere, Samantha was still out there, living her life, keeping her secrets safe.